2 spoons of the same powder sitting in the back of your fridge right now can strip the slugs out of your garden overnight, wipe the gray dust off your squash before it swallows the whole plant, and clear the tiny green bugs curling the tips of your beans and your roses before the week is out. Not the bottle from the garden aisle with a skull and crossbones warning label. Not the spray with a name you cannot say out loud without sounding like you swallowed a chemistry exam. 2 spoons of the plain white powder already in your cupboard. I know exactly how that sounds. Give me a few minutes, because right in the middle of this, I am going to hand you the one piece almost everybody skips. The piece that decides whether this works at all, or whether you end up back at the store shaking your head, telling yourself, the old trick was nothing but a story somebody's grandmother made up. Let's start with the money, because the money tells the truth before anything else does. Call a lawn and pest company out to your property for a single visit, and you are looking at somewhere close to $230, sometimes more depending on where you live. Skip the service and buy the products yourself off the shelf instead. The fungus spray, the pellets for the slugs, the aphid killer, and you are still spending somewhere around $60 or $70 just to get through one season. Now here is the other number. The powder from your kitchen, a splash of oil from the pantry, a few drops of dish soap from under your sink. All 3 problems handled for less than $4 total. Nobody is putting that on a commercial. There is no company that profits from telling you. The answer was already sitting on your shelf, so that message never reaches you. And millions of people keep restocking the same expensive bottle year after year without ever finding out what was 2 feet away the whole time. My name is Eli Yoder. I have not carried a bag of pellets or a bottle of fungicide home from a store in over 2 decades. In all that time, the ground behind my house has not lost a single crop to slugs, to mildew, or to the soft little bugs that show up every summer looking for something tender to feed on. In the next few minutes, I am going to walk you through 3 fixes that come from the same box in your kitchen. And then I am going to show you one upgrade at the very end that takes all 3 of them further than baking soda ever could on its own. You will understand exactly why that upgrade matters once we get there. And no, you do not need to change how you live to use any of it. If you want to catch the next one when it goes up, go ahead and subscribe now before you forget. Nobody paid me to make this video, and nobody is standing behind the camera with a product to push. The entire cost for everything I am about to show you for a full season, covering all 3 of these headaches, comes to less than $4. I have watched neighbors spend a whole Saturday morning driving to 3 different stores looking for the right bottle, standing in an aisle reading the back of a label they can barely pronounce, trying to figure out if it's safe around their kids or their dog. I have watched them come home, spray it on once, and still lose half a bed of squash 2 weeks later because the label never told them the one thing that actually matters, which is how to make the spray stay put on the leaf instead of rolling right off. That is not an accident. A company that sells you a bottle you use once and toss in the trash has no reason to teach you anything that makes the bottle last longer or work better. A neighbor who has been doing this for 20 years does. That is the whole difference between what I am about to hand you and what is sitting on that shelf. Here is the thread running underneath everything I am going to tell you today. And it is the part I have never seen anybody actually explain properly. The powder in your kitchen and the active ingredient hiding inside that $25 bottle at the garden center work off the exact same principle. The same understanding my own grandfather carried around in his head decades before either of those things ever had a name printed on a label. That is precisely the part the people selling you the bottle would rather you never bother looking into. My grandfather raised his family on a stretch of land without ever once calling a service company or flipping through a seasonal product catalog. He kept what he needed within arm's reach. What he needed had almost always already been provided by the kitchen, the fireplace, or the land itself. He never drove into town for a spray bottle. He didn't see any sense in paying extra for a fancier version of something the house had been making for free the whole time. I remember being about 10 years old when the bed along the east fence turned pale and stubborn after a couple of dry summers in a row. Everything we planted there came up thin and weak, no matter how much we watered it. He took me out one morning, spread a light dusting of cold ash across the whole bed, worked it down into the topsoil, and watered it in deep. All he said was that the ground was hungry for something it had lost, and this would give it back. That same season, the bed came back to life. It took me years of reading on my own to understand what he already knew, just from watching that dirt for a lifetime. He was not a man who explained himself much, and he was not a man who trusted anything he could not see the reason behind. If a thing worked, he kept doing it. If it stopped working, he changed it, and he never once needed a label to tell him why. I think about that a lot now, standing in a garden center aisle full of bottles, with warning labels 3 paragraphs long, watching people squint at ingredient lists they cannot make sense of, trusting a stranger in a lab coat they will never meet over the plain evidence sitting right in front of them in their own garden. My grandfather would have found that strange. He would have asked why anyone pays $25 for a locked box when the key was already hanging by the back door the whole time. Before I get into the first fix, tell me down in the comments where you're gardening from and which of these 3 problems is giving you the worst time right now. The slugs working under cover of dark, the pale dust spreading across your squash and cucumber leaves, or the soft little bugs clustering on the new growth of your roses and beans. Write it down. I go through every comment, and I will point you straight to the part of this that matters most for what you're dealing with. Now let's get into it. 3 fixes, 1 problem at a time, and every single one of them starts in the same kitchen box. The first fix is for the slugs. Out of everything that can break a gardener's spirit, slugs do it the quietest because they only work under cover of darkness and dampness, and by the time you find the damage, they've already slipped back underground. You plant your bean starts and your young cabbage in the afternoon, water them in with care, walk the rows again at dusk, feeling good about the day's work, and go to bed satisfied. By morning, the stems are severed clean at the soil line, and the tops are lying flat in the dirt, like something took a razor to them. The slug was already gone before the sun came up. There's no trail to follow. There's just an empty patch of dirt where a week of your effort used to be standing. The blue pellets you can buy for this do kill slugs. That much is true, but they don't discriminate about what else they hurt. A family dog, the barn cat, the songbirds that come through cleaning up in the morning, none of them are safe if they get near those pellets. You don't need any of that. No pellets, no service call, no contract with a chemical company. We have never needed a single one of those things on our land. Plain baking soda, taken dry, straight from the box, not mixed into water. A slug is mostly water held together inside a body with almost no protective barrier against the outside world. The moment that soft body crosses a line of dry baking soda, the powder pulls the moisture straight out of it. A slug will not cross that line. It cannot. Lay down a thin line of dry baking soda around the base of whichever plants took the worst damage last year, and along the outer edges of any bed where you've spotted their slime trails in the morning light. Put it down in the early evening, before they come up to feed. while the soil still has some dryness left in it from the day. Keep the line narrow. Think of a chalk mark, not a mound. That thin line is what does the work. Put it back down after every single rain without skipping it, because that's the one habit this whole method depends on. That's exactly the difference between someone who tries this once, gets rained on, gives up, and tells everyone it doesn't work, and someone who actually sees results all season long. One more note before we move past this. Cold, dry wood ash from a fireplace or a fire pit works through that same principle against slugs, and if you happen to have it on hand, it's actually the better option of the two. I'll explain exactly why toward the end of this video. That covers the slugs. Once that's handled, the next thing that shows up on the same squash, the same cucumber vines, the same rose bushes, almost on the same calendar date every single year, is that pale, powdery coating spreading across the leaves. That's a fungus living right on the surface of the leaf, feeding off the plant from the outside, blocking sunlight and slowly choking the plant it's taken hold of. Left alone, it spreads to every leaf within reach. This is where a box from your kitchen cupboard and a university research lab landed on the exact same conclusion, decades apart, without either one ever consulting the other. The second fix is for that pale coating on the leaves. Powdery mildew is picky about where it settles. It needs the surface of a leaf to sit at a certain balance, leaning slightly acidic, slightly neutral, and that's exactly where it feels at home. Baking soda flips that balance the moment it's applied. Dissolved in water and sprayed across a leaf, it pushes the surface toward alkaline, and any spore trying to take hold there simply cannot get a grip. The shift draws the water out of the spore before it ever gets the chance to anchor itself. It's a bit like trying to plant a seed on a hot skillet. Nothing takes root. A plant scientist out of a well-known agricultural research university began publishing findings on exactly this back in the late 1980s, running controlled trials of baking soda against powdery mildew and black spot on garden roses, and the results still get cited in gardening circles decades later. He landed on the same conclusion my own grandmother had already worked out standing at the pump behind the summer kitchen years before that, with the same box from the same kind of shelf. No lab coat and no research grant required. The base mix is 1 tablespoon of baking soda dissolved into 1 gallon of water. And here is the part I promised you at the start, the piece almost everyone leaves out. Most people stop right there, at that 1 ratio. They spray it on, wait a few days, and the mildew is still crawling across the leaves exactly like before. So they give up, head back to the store, and decide the old home remedy was nothing but folklore. They were 1 ingredient away from it actually working, and they never knew it. Baking soda mixed into plain water beads up on the waxy surface of a leaf slides right off the edge and dries in patches instead of coating evenly. The fungus barely notices it's there. What you actually need is 1 tablespoon of a light cooking oil and a few drops of plain liquid dish soap added into that same gallon. The soap breaks the surface tension of the water, so the spray spreads out flat and even across the leaf instead of beading and rolling off. The oil is what keeps it clinging there through the overnight dew and through the hours when the fungus is most active. Without those 2 additions, the baking soda never has time to do its job before it's gone. With them, you've built the same formula sitting in that $18 bottle at the garden center, mixed up from what's already under your kitchen sink. My grandfather used to describe what the soap does as making the water lie flat against the leaf instead of standing up on it like a bead of dew. He never used the word for it, but he understood exactly what it was doing just from watching plain water sit on a waxy leaf in the sun, spray both the tops and undersides of the leaves early in the morning or in the cool of the evening, never in the direct heat of midday. Coat the young tips and buds along with the leaves that already show signs of trouble because the spores are usually a step ahead of what you can actually see. Test it first on 3 or 4 leaves and give the plant a full day to respond before you cover the whole thing. Reapply every 1 to 2 weeks through the growing season, and again any time a hard rain washes it away. If a particular plant has caught the same fungus every August for years running, start spraying before that first pale patch ever shows up, because the spores overwinter in nearby bark and in fallen leaves, and they already know the path back to your garden. If the mildew has already taken over most of a plant, pull off the worst of those leaves. Carry them well away from the garden in a bucket, and do not toss them in your compost pile, because the spores clinging to them will simply reinfect everything nearby all over again. Keep spraying whatever healthy growth remains every 7 days without missing one. You're not reversing a heavy infection at that point. You're protecting what's still left. That's the honest limit of what this spray can do for you, and it's still well worth doing. The third fix, using that same mixture, takes care of the soft-bodied bugs, the little green and black clusters that show up on the new growth of your roses, your beans, and your squash during the warmest stretch of summer. These bugs have no shell, no armor to speak of, and they feed right where they land, which means they can't move fast enough to dodge a proper spray. The soap and the oil break down the thin, waxy layer that normally keeps a soft-bodied insect from drying out in open air, and the alkaline shift from the baking soda finishes the job. Spray directly onto the clusters and the undersides of the leaves, where they breed and where their eggs sit, in the morning or the evening. Go back through again in 3 or 4 days to catch anything that hatched after your first pass. This is a contact treatment, so it only works exactly where you put it, and it doesn't linger in the soil or the air. That means the ladybugs, the lacewings, and the tiny parasitic wasps working through your garden all season, quietly eating pest eggs for free, are left completely untouched. Stop spraying broad chemical treatments for 1 full season, and those free workers start coming back on their own. Within a year, they'll be doing more pest control than anything you ever bought off a shelf. I want to be honest with you about something most videos on this subject skip right past. The first year you switch over to this, whence you might see a slightly heavier aphid week here or there while the ladybugs and lacewings find their way back to your garden. That is not the method failing you. That is the natural balance resetting itself after however many years of broad chemical spray kept every beneficial insect away along with the pests. Stick with the contact spray through that first season and let nature refill the gap. By the second year, most people tell me they are spraying for aphids maybe once or twice all summer instead of every single week, because the garden is finally doing part of the work on its own again. Now, before we get to the last part, let me be straight with you the way a neighbor would, instead of the way a product label does. Baking soda is sodium bicarbonate. That word sodium means salt, and too much of it building up in your soil over years of repeated spraying isn't doing your ground any favors. Keep the soda as a leaf spray, not something you pour by the bucket straight onto the ground. Give your beds a deep, thorough watering a few times each season to flush things through properly. And if you're gardening in containers or in a small raised bed where everything concentrates faster, go light on the dry slug line and lean more heavily on the leaf spray instead. If you're spraying weekly through a full summer, here's the upgrade that answers every concern I just raised and pushes the whole method further: potassium bicarbonate. Same family of powder as baking soda. Same alkaline reaction against fungus, backed by that same university research I mentioned earlier. But where baking soda leaves sodium sitting in your soil as it breaks down over a long season, Potassium bicarbonate leaves potassium behind instead. And potassium happens to be one of the 3 ingredients every single bag of fertilizer has bragged about on its label since fertilizer bags existed. The same spray that beats back the mildew is also feeding the very plant it's protecting. No salt building up in the ground. Potassium going back into the soil with every single pass of the sprayer. Here's the part worth sitting with for a second. A large share of the fungicide products sitting on garden center shelves for $25 a bottle list potassium bicarbonate as their main active ingredient. Not one item buried in a long list, the actual ingredient doing all the work. You can buy it by the pound at almost any home winemaking supply shop, where it's used to manage acidity during fermentation. A full pound runs about what one of those small bottles costs, and it stretches across many gallons of spray. 1 tablespoon per gallon of water, 1 tablespoon of light oil, a few drops of dish soap. Same formula, same schedule, same spray pattern as the baking soda version. Except now, whatever settles into your soil with every application is potassium feeding your plants at the exact same time it's protecting their leaves. That's also the reason dry wood ash makes a better slug barrier than plain baking soda. Ash is naturally loaded with potassium, and once that dry line finishes its job and washes into the soil with the next rain, it leaves potassium behind instead of salt. The baking soda does the same job on the surface, but leaves sodium in its place. Same result above ground, a very different gift left behind underneath it. Now you've got the whole picture. My grandfather worked ash into his soil to build up potassium without ever knowing that word for it. A research lab took that same underlying principle, isolated the exact bicarbonate compound responsible, gave it a name nobody outside a lab could pronounce, and started charging $25 a bottle for the same chemistry your wood stove or fire pit has been making for free every single winter. Here's exactly what to do with all of this, starting tonight. This evening, before it gets fully dark, sprinkle a thin line of dry baking soda, or dry wood ash if you've got a fireplace going, around the base of every plant the slugs hit hardest last season. 10 minutes, start to finish. Tomorrow morning, pull together what you need for the spray: the baking soda box, a bottle of light cooking oil, and the dish soap from under your sink. Mix up a single test gallon and spray it on 3 or 4 leaves of whichever plant had trouble with mildew or bugs last year. Give it a full day and watch how it responds. This coming weekend, once you know it's safe, coat every leaf, top and bottom, on those same plants. You're not waiting around for a problem to show up. You're making the leaf surface inhospitable before anything ever has the chance to land on it. Tell me down in the comments where you're gardening from, and which of these 3 gave you the roughest time this past season. The slugs working under the cover of night, the pale coating spreading across your leaves, or the soft bugs settling into your new growth. Write it down specifically, because I read every comment, and I'll tell you exactly which of these 3 to start with for your soil and your growing season. Next time, I'll walk you through the way my grandfather used to read the soil every single spring before he touched a single bed or added a thing to it. The method, the exact signs he looked for, and the one simple result that tells you in under a minute whether your ground needs feeding, needs draining, or just needs to rest. No test kit required, no lab fee attached. Subscribe now so you don't miss it. Stay grounded, keep it simple, and remember, the people who built what we have with their own 2 hands already knew most of what we're only now getting around to relearning. I'm Eli Yoder, and I'll see you in the next one.